The first thing he saw was the horse, collapsed in the snow, sides stiff, breath long gone. Its saddle was torn, twisted beneath its weight, blood frozen into the leather. The second thing he saw was her. She lay a few feet beyond the animal, crumpled in the white like a broken doll, skirts soaked and clinging, hair tangled across her face, one boot missing. A branch had torn her shoulder open, deep enough to paint the snow beneath her. She wasn't moving. Elan stepped off his own mule slowly, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the ridge. This close to the old logging trail, he didn't trust stillness. Only his dog, a thick-coated mutt named Birch, moved freely, circling the woman once, then returning to the dead horse with a low, anxious whine. Ellen crouched beside the woman first, brushing hair from her face. She was young, pale, lips cracked from wind, but her chest rose, shallow, shaking, alive. He pulled a flask from his coat and tipped a few drops between her lips. She flinched but didn't wake. Behind him, Birch scratched at the saddlebag, growling softly. Elan ignored it at first, bundling the woman in his thickest fur wrap, lifting her carefully into his arms. But the dog didn't stop. He barked once, sharply, then began digging with both paws, snow and mud flying. Elan turned just in time to see something shift beneath the ruined saddle flap. A movement, a sound, a muffled cry. Heart hammering, he knelt and pulled the torn saddlebag wide. Inside, wrapped in a wool cloak dark with blood, was a baby, tiny, wailing now, fists trembling in the cold. Elan froze, the weight of it hitting him all at once. Woman, horse, and now, child. He didn't hesitate long. He lifted the bundle out gently, tucking the infant to his chest beneath his coat where warmth still lingered, and turned back to the woman. She was slipping fast. He could see it in the gray of her lips, the shiver gone from her limbs. Without another thought, he hoisted them both, one arm for her, the other wrapped tightly around the newborn, and moved. The trail back to his cabin was long, but he knew it blind. Birch led the way, glancing back with every few steps. Snow began to fall again. Soft, steady, too quiet. But Elan's mind raced. Who was she? Why was the baby hidden in the saddle like a secret buried in leather? And what kind of danger had ridden ahead of them to leave a scene like this behind? He didn't have the answers. But he knew one thing with certainty. Whatever they'd run from had not died with the horse. She woke to warmth, not the soft, familiar kind of a bed or home, but the thick, primal heat of a fire, burning close and a fur quilt drawn to her chin. Her shoulder ached, pulsing in time with her heartbeat, but the pain was distant, as if someone else's body bore it. Above her, rough-hewn rafters crossed a low cabin ceiling. The smell of pine resin, smoke, and something gently boiling on the hearth filled the room. Then came the sound, the soft, wet hiccup of an infant's cry. She jerked upright too fast and winced, nearly collapsing again as her shoulder pulled fire through her nerves. A heavy hand caught her before she tipped, strong but careful. She looked up and found him. The mountain man. He had the kind of face carved from storms, wild dark beard, shoulder-length hair, deep creases at the brow. But his eyes, they were gentle. Not soft, but calm in a way she hadn't felt in weeks. He didn't speak. He only offered a tin cup of warm broth and motioned toward the cradle near the fire. Her breath caught. The baby, wrapped in one of his shirts, sleeping soundly. Is he... she... Her voice cracked. The man nodded once, then crossed to the cradle and adjusted the blanket around the child. She stared at them both, confusion churning beneath the relief. How did you find us?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the table, picked up something small and held it out. A bracelet, worn. Silver, twisted like river vines, with a single blue bead at its center. Her eyes filled with tears. It had belonged to her husband. He'd fastened it to the baby's wrist himself before the last stretch of their journey. "The saddle," she whispered. "It was under the saddle?" The man nodded again. Then he pointed to his dog, who lay curled near the fire but raised its head proudly at the gesture. She managed a soft laugh, choked by emotion. "Smart dog." Her gaze returned to the baby. "She's not mine by blood," she murmured. "My sister died birthing her. I promised I'd get her out before—" Her voice faltered. "Before they came." The mountain man's brow creased slightly. Not with confusion, but recognition. He went to the corner, rummaged through a canvas pouch, and pulled out a folded map. She watched him lay it on the table and point to a mark drawn in red charcoal. A mining camp. Far too close. Her breath went shallow. "They followed us?" His jaw tightened. He didn't need to nod. She already knew. Whatever nightmare they'd escaped had claws, and it wasn't finished hunting. Not yet. Clara didn't sleep that night. Even with the baby fed, swaddled, and tucked safely beside her, her eyes stayed fixed on the rafters while the fire cracked and the wind hissed against the shuttered windows. The mountain man, he still hadn't given her his name, sat in his usual spot by the door, sharpening a blade with slow, rhythmic strokes, not as a threat, as readiness. She watched him in silence until the weight of everything pressed the words out of her. "They weren't after me," she said, voice hoarse. "Not really. They were after her." He looked up, gaze steady. No surprise there. He already knew. She swallowed. "Her mother, my sister, Miriam. She married one of the surveyors. Before she knew what they were doing, the mining company made promises, schools, roads, trade. But when she found out what they really wanted..." She hesitated, eyes drifting to the child. They didn't want the land. They wanted what was under it, gold, and she had the only deed left, a real one, handwritten, signed by a Lakota elder 30 years ago, naming her as protector of that valley. The mountain man's sharpening slowed. They tried to buy her out. She refused, so they sent men. Her voice cracked. She didn't survive the second visit, but she'd hidden the deed inside the baby's saddle roll, along with her bracelet. Clara looked towards the cradle. "They think the child is just an orphan, but she's heir to that land. The last legal thread tying their company to a promise they'd rather bury than honor." The man stood without a word and walked to the hearth. He pulled something from the mantel, a small leather pouch. He opened it, reached in, and gently laid something on the table. A folded document. Yellowed. Creased. Clara stood slowly, every step toward it echoing in her bones. She opened it and gasped. Her sister's deed. The baby's inheritance. The only thing that could stop the company from wiping the land clean. "You found this?" she asked, looking up. He nodded. "Then why didn't you burn it?" Her voice shook. "You could have protected yourself. Burned it and no one would come looking." He reached for his paper and charcoal, wrote slowly, then turned it to her. "Because she's not just someone's child, she's a future worth defending." Clara pressed a hand to her mouth, tears welling. In a world where greed had taken everything, here was one man who still knew what sacred meant. And he'd drawn a line in the snow with his silence. It was near dusk when the knock came. Not loud, not rushed, just 3 sharp raps against the cabin door. Clara stiffened where she stood, a bowl of dried herbs in her hands, while the baby slept nearby in a bundle of wool. The mountain man was already at the door, rifle in one hand, body still as stone. He didn't open it right away. He waited, listening. No voices, no footsteps, just wind. Then another knock. Still calm. Too calm. He nodded once to Clara, and she ducked behind the curtain beside the hearth, clutching the child to her chest. From the crack between the fabric and wall, she watched him slowly unlatch the door and pull it open. The man standing outside didn't wear a gun. He wore a gray coat, dusted with snow, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. No badge, no weapon she could see. But he had a company man's mouth, slick, slow-talking, and full of practiced patience. "Evening," he said, voice smooth. "Name's Marston. I'm looking for a woman and child that may have passed through this way. Horse went missing. Bit of an accident, I hear." The mountain man said nothing, just stared. Marston smiled. "You don't look like the talkative type. That's fine. I'm just here to recover what belongs to my employer. A baby girl wrapped in Lakota cloth. There's concern for her health." From her hiding place, Clara's blood went cold. He knew exactly what to ask for. But he wasn't yelling. He wasn't threatening. He was fishing, feeling for guilt, weakness, hesitation. "Course," Marston went on. "If she's here, we'd be mighty grateful to bring her back safely. My employer's even willing to offer payment. Couple silver bars. Quiet agreement, no trouble." The mountain man didn't blink, didn't shift. After a long pause, he stepped forward and closed the door. No violence, no words, just a door gently shut in a liar's face. Clara held her breath, waiting for gunfire, waiting for boots to stomp the porch. But nothing came. A moment later, she heard hooves crunching snow, slow, steady, retreating. When the mountain man finally turned, she stepped out with the baby in her arms. "That man doesn't come alone," she whispered. He nodded, walked to the table, pulled out the map again. This time he circled a new ridge in red, then wrote, "They'll circle back by week's end." Clara looked at the baby's sleeping face, then at the man with rifle and silence who stood guard over both of them. "Then we make the ridge ours before they do." And she meant it. The next morning the wind had changed. It blew up from the south, carrying the scent of wet pine and something else, something metallic, like cold iron or old fear. Clara stood at the cabin's edge, arms wrapped around the baby, watching the trees sway like sentries with secrets. The mountain man was already moving, checking traps, walking the perimeter, silent as ever but sharper now, every motion coiled with intent. She waited until he returned and laid the baby gently in her cot. Then she walked over to the rifle propped against the far wall. Her hand hovered over it before she gripped the stock. He turned, brow furrowed, as she held it upright. "You said they'll come by week's end," she said quietly. "Then I want to learn before they do." He studied her, not with surprise, but with the slow, heavy weight of someone who understood what this choice cost. Finally, he nodded. That afternoon, he led her to a clearing just past the tree line where stumps made for easy markers. He handed her the rifle, not the smaller one, but his, and guided her hands gently over the barrel, the trigger, the stock. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. His hands were steady, his eyes sharper than any words. Clara lined up her shot, shoulders tense, breath shallow. The first shot missed wide and kicked her hard. She staggered. "Again," she said, teeth gritted. He gave her no praise, no pity, just reloaded. On the third shot, she clipped the edge of the bark. The fourth rang clean. The echo scattered birds from the treetops, but Clara stood still, breathing hard, her arms trembling, not from fear, but from something colder. Resolve. That night she ate with her rifle resting beside her chair. The baby cooed softly as she chewed, and Birch curled at her feet. The mountain man carved something from a block of wood near the fire. Her hands, she realized after a while. Cradling the child. He hadn't shown it to her, just kept shaping it, piece by piece, like a man trying to remember what gentleness felt like. She leaned forward. "If they come for her," she said, "they'll have to step over both of us." He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time since he found her, something in his face cracked. Not fear, not doubt, something deeper, like he believed her. He rose, walked to the wall where the baby's name had been etched beside her sister's, Miriam, and slowly added one more word beneath them both. Clara. Not as property, not as passenger, as protector. It came just before dawn, slicing through the silence like a scream held too long. The bullet cracked past the cabin's front window, shattering the edge of the frame, splintering wood, and burying itself in the beam above Clara's cot, mere inches from where the baby lay bundled. Clara lunged, shielding the child before her thoughts could catch up, heart pounding so loud it drowned the wind. The mountain man was already moving, rifle in hand, crouched low, eyes scanning the tree line through the shutter cracks. One shot, no follow-up, no rush. It hadn't been meant to kill. It had been meant to announce. Clara gritted her teeth. "They're not here to talk." He nodded, motioned toward the rear hatch. But this time she didn't run. She tightened the wrap around the baby, settled her into the reinforced wood cradle beside the hearth, and grabbed the second rifle. The mountain man paused, searching her face for something. Fear, hesitation. She gave him none. Just a hard nod. "I'm not leaving her side." He didn't argue. Instead, he handed her a pouch of ammunition and positioned a second crate under the side window where she could watch the ridge. He moved like a ghost, silent, swift, practiced. She watched him disappear into the trees, Birch right at his heels. The plan was simple. Draw them out, make them believe the cabin was vulnerable, then flank them from the north bluff. Clara's job was harder. Wait, and guard what couldn't be moved. She pressed her eye to the crack in the shutter and waited. Minutes dragged. The wind picked up, rustling the pines like whispers. The baby stirred, then fell still again. Then, movement. A shape, no, two, stepping from the trees, slow, deliberate, one carrying a rifle, the other with a torch. They weren't hurrying. They didn't think they needed to. Clara's breath caught as the one with the torch stepped forward and shouted, "You've got something that doesn't belong to you. Bring out the girl and the papers and we'll leave the cabin standing." She said nothing. He smirked, lit the torch, threw it. The flame arced through the air, headed straight for the cabin wall. Clara didn't think. She stood, aimed, and fired. The torch fell mid-flight. The man who threw it screamed and dropped behind cover, clutching his hand. The second man raised his rifle. Clara reloaded in one breath. Fired again. Silence. She crouched low, shaking. The door creaked. She spun, rifle raised, only to see the mountain man step inside, dragging both attackers by their coats. Birch trotted in behind him, tail wagging like it had all been a game. Clara lowered her rifle, knees weak. The message had been sent. This cabin wasn't defenseless, and this woman wasn't a victim anymore. They tied the two attackers to the log posts behind the cabin, wrists bound tight with trapline wire, stripped of weapons, boots kicked away to keep them from running. Clara stood just outside the door, rifle slung over her shoulder, watching their breath fog in the morning air. One whimpered quietly. The other kept grinning, even with a bloodied lip. "You shoot better than you look," he rasped. Clara said nothing. She didn't need to. The mountain man came out carrying a tin cup of water. He crouched beside the louder of the two and held the cup just out of reach. The man stared at it greedily. "Name," Clara said. "Who sent you?" "You already know," the man spat. "Marston, and he don't give up." The other one snorted. "Especially not now that he's coming." Clara's stomach tightened. "Who?" They exchanged a glance. The first man leaned forward, grin gone cold. "You'll know him when you see him. Man in a black suit speaks like a preacher, looks like a banker. He's got a deed to that land in one pocket and a revolver in the other." The second man chuckled bitterly. "And he's got your name in his book, sweetheart." The mountain man stood slowly, walked to the woodpile, and returned with a bundle of rope and cloth. He gagged them both, ignoring their muffled protests, then dragged a pine branch across the snow to erase all tracks leading to the back of the cabin. Clara stepped inside, hands shaking. Not from fear, but recognition. The man in the suit. She knew him. Victor Langford. He'd been the overseer at the mining office back in Westwater. He was the one who first offered her sister help with the land. The one who smiled too wide and signed nothing in ink. He'd cornered Clara once, after a church gathering, told her some land's too good for women to manage alone. She'd told Miriam. Miriam had laughed in his face. Now Miriam was dead. Clara stood over the cradle, brushing her hand gently across the baby's soft cheek. "He'll come himself," she whispered. "He doesn't trust anyone else with the deed." The mountain man knelt beside her, paper and charcoal in hand. He wrote a single sentence. "Then we make sure he leaves with nothing." Clara nodded slowly, fire rising in her chest. "Not nothing," she said. "A limp, a scar, a reminder." Outside, snow began to fall again, thin and sharp as memory. And deep in the valley below, the man in the black suit was already riding, deed in one pocket, death in the other, and Clara's name etched like a target in his mind. He didn't come with torchlight or shouting men. He came with silence, like a storm that thought itself civil. Victor Langford rode up the trail alone, dressed in black from collar to heel, his coat heavy with wealth, his gloves clean despite the mud. The pistol holstered at his hip gleamed even under clouded sky, and the way he dismounted told Clara everything. This man had never ridden fast in his life, because nothing had ever made him run. She watched from the window, breath caught, hands clenched at her sides. The baby stirred in her arms but didn't cry, as if even the child knew this wasn't a moment for noise. The mountain man stood by the hearth, loading a final round into his rifle. Not rushed, not tense, just ready. Langford didn't knock. He opened the cabin door like it belonged to him and stepped inside, shaking the snow from his coat as casually as if he were entering a saloon. His eyes swept the room and landed on Clara. His smile was razor thin. "There you are," he said, voice like oil. "You've caused quite a bit of fuss for something that was never yours to begin with." The mountain man didn't move. Langford didn't acknowledge him. "Let's keep this simple," he continued. "You hand over the child and the deed. Yes, we know it survived. And I give you my word no charges will follow. You can walk away." Free Clara stared at him. "Free like my sister was?" His smile never faltered. "Your sister was a regrettable complication, but I'm here to correct that. Legally, of course." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. A deed. His version. A forgery, Clara guessed, but clean, stamped, and backed by powerful men. "You can't own land," he added smoothly. "You don't live long enough to protect." Clara passed the baby to the cradle and stepped forward. "You're wrong," she said quietly. "I'm not the one protecting it." Langford's brow lifted. "Then who—" He didn't finish. The mountain man moved without sound, rifle aimed, not at Langford's chest, but his hand. The pistol. One shot cracked through the cabin. Langford screamed, dropping the gun, hand torn open and bleeding. The forged deed fluttered to the floor. Clara picked it up, tossed it into the fire, and watched it curl to ash. Langford staggered back toward the door, clutching his arm, fury breaking through the slick mask on his face. "You've made a mistake," he spat. "You don't know who I am?" Clara met his eyes, steady. "I know exactly who you are. That's why you're still breathing." He fled without another word. And for the first time since the mountain claimed her, Clara knew it had also kept her. The morning after Langford fled, the cabin stood quiet. Not the fearful quiet of waiting, but the stillness that followed storms, the kind where broken things finally settle. Clara sat on the porch with the baby in her arms, watching the sun rise over the ridge. The snow had started to melt, trickling in soft threads down the rocks, exposing soil and pine needles and the faint green promise of spring. The mountain man sat beside her, his dog curled at his feet. Neither had spoken since dawn. There was no need. She looked down at the baby's face, round and peaceful, wrapped in the same cloth her sister had once sewn with trembling hands. "She doesn't have a name yet," Clara said softly. "Miriam didn't live long enough to give her one." The mountain man turned, brow lifted slightly, and after a moment stood and disappeared inside the cabin. He returned with a small wooden carving, the one he'd been working on for days. A woman's hands, cradling a child. He placed it in Clara's lap and knelt in front of her. Then, with slow precision, he carved 4 letters into the base. L-U-M-I. "Lumi," Clara whispered. "Light." He nodded once. Not just light, but the kind that returned after long dark. She smiled. "It's perfect." That afternoon, she buried the last of the forged papers in the fire pit behind the cabin. The real deed, the one her sister had hidden, remained locked in the hollow beam beneath the hearth, untouched. Safe. The mountain man brought her the map they'd marked together, but instead of circling routes or hiding spots, he drew a square right around the cabin, and below it he etched 3 names: Clara, Lumi, Elan. "That your name?" she asked, surprised. He nodded. It felt like a gift, a name offered, not taken. She looked at the simple square he'd drawn. Their cabin, their ridge, their future. "I don't want to keep running," she said. "I don't want revenge, or to prove anything to men like Langford. I want to plant something, build something." For her, he took her hand in both of his, rough palms warm against her fingers, and nodded again. This time, with finality. That evening, Clara took Lumi outside and placed her tiny feet in the thawed earth for the first time. The baby giggled, wind lifting her dark curls. Clara looked out over the valley. Hers now, not by blood or battle, but by promise. She had nothing left to prove. She had everything left to grow. The spring sun rose soft over the mountain, turning frost to steam and dusting the ridge with gold. Clara stood barefoot in the doorway, the baby in her arms, and the real deed spread across the table behind her. Ink still fresh. Her name, written in steady hand beneath her sister's, now claimed the valley not with vengeance, but with care. Elan had fashioned a new pen for her from pine and bone, and it had taken her half the morning to find the courage to press it to parchment. But when she did, her hand hadn't shaken, not once, not after all they'd survived. She watched Lumi sleep, her small chest rising in rhythm with the breeze that slipped through the open window. Birch dozed nearby, ears flicking with every creak of wind. And Elan? He was outside, hauling fresh boards for the second cabin. It hadn't been her idea to build it. It had been his gift. A space for a future, for growing things. Herbs, books, laughter. Maybe more children one day. Not a hideout. A home. When he returned, shirt damp with effort, beard still dusted with sawdust, Clara met him at the door. She held out the deed, folded, sealed, and smiled. "You'll keep it here?" she asked. "Hidden, like before?" He took it from her hands, then stepped inside. Instead of hiding it, he knelt by the hearth, pulled out the hollow beam, and placed it back inside. But this time with something else, a carved box with their names etched along the edge. He closed it, then looked up. Clara knelt beside him. "If they ever come back?" she asked. He touched her cheek, soft and slow, then wrote one word in the soot near the fire. "We. Not I. Not you. We." She kissed him then, not out of urgency or fear, but with the steadiness of someone who had nothing left to outrun. Later, with Lumi nestled in her arms and Elon beside her, Clara stepped onto the porch and watched the ridge blaze with wildflowers beginning to bloom through the melting snow. There was no storm coming, no echo of hooves, just a breeze, a heartbeat, a land once hunted now held. The mountain had given her no welcome. It had tested her, broken her, stripped her down to bone. But it had also offered her something rarer than safety, a place to begin again. And in that beginning, Clara didn't feel like a woman rescued. She felt like a woman who had claimed a name, a future, a child, a man, and land no one would ever take from her again.